warmth. It's vital to anyone living north of the tropics, and for most of us, staying alive is a question of calories, clothing, and providing heat to our shelter. It is winter in Alaska. Snow covers the ground. The lakes and rivers have frozen over. There's frost on the window panes. For more than 500,000 Alaska residents living in roadside communities, turning up the heat is a matter of convenience. It might cost more, but the energy is available. Not so in more than 200 rural communities that are accessible only by air or by water. During the ice-free months of summer, heating fuel, groceries, and other supplies are barged up or down river and stored for the coming winter. Here at St. Mary's on the lower Yukon River, fuel tanks have been filled with diesel to run giant generators. They hum away 24/7 to meet the village's lighting and other electrical needs. Other tanks contain heating oil for more than 180 homes, some of which will burn 5 gallons on a cold winter's night. At the going rate of $8.85 a gallon, many local residents, especially those in villages where there is no firewood, have to choose between groceries or heating oil.
In many of our communities that we work in, stove oil in particular can be over $10 a gallon.
But things can get worse. When temperatures drop to 40 or 50 below zero and a cold snap hangs on for weeks or even months, villages can run out of fuel.
I have heard of it being flown in and it quadrupling its prices compared to the barge prices. Tends to be way up there.
That's Albert Romer, a lifelong resident from the village of Kipnuk. He's part of an elite crew that insulates homes against cold weather. From April through September, he travels to towns like St. Mary's as part of the Rural Alaska Community Action Program's Weatherization team.
Normally, a community will reach out to us for weatherization needs. At that point, we start taking applications, and those applications are income approved. And once that's all taken care of, I can actually travel to that community and start the assessment process.
When it comes to rural homes, many are outdated, with paper-thin windows and very little insulation in the walls, floors, and ceilings. Brad Smith knows all too well the discomfort of a poorly insulated home.
Growing up in Atlan was, was a gold mining town of about 200 people when we moved there, and we bought the old courthouse, which had 14-foot ceilings in the bottom and was impossible to heat. It was a 1909 build, so grew up freezing all the time. Water barrel in the kitchen freezing. When we moved from there, we moved to a newer place. It was a 1911 build with no insulation at all. And in fact, the room off the kitchen froze. It was our freezer because we couldn't heat it. So I guess being cold growing up a lot, the weatherization resonates with me.
From downtown Juneau to the remote village of Kivalina and dozens of villages in between, Brad Smith has been part of a program that has weatherized more than 13,000 homes.
We had a trapline cabin and we chinked the logs and did things like that. But I wasn't really aware much of weatherization until I moved to Juneau, Alaska. And I was in construction there and that fell through, and ended up working for Rural Cap at the weatherization office there, and we were doing 100 units a year in Juneau at that time. And the next year they sent me out in my first rural trip, and that was up to Ambler for 9 weeks. And at that point I hadn't had really a ton of training in weatherization per se, but construction, I had. So a lot of that kind of goes hand in hand, and especially if you're in construction in the north, so you're you're fed weatherization whether you realize it or not in the building styles and things. So that was a real eye opener. I was lucky to go up with a very experienced weatherizer, so I learned a lot early on, and that started my rural adventures.
As part of Rural Cap's weatherization program for more than 15 years, he's seen just about every imaginable cause of heat loss in homes. On top of that, homes in some communities succumb to seasonal flooding. That wipes out the insulation under the floors and the insides of lower walls.
Emonic, when I went in there after the flood, I think was probably the worst. Everything along the shore, which I had 34 houses there, and I think I had about 17 that we needed to raise up over 3 feet to get them up above the flood line. And some of those were knocked off their blocks, laying in the mud in the field. The sewer and water had been ripped out of them, so there was sewer all over the place, and it was pretty rough. And silt, just layers and layers of silt.
Here in St. Mary's, he and his crew will work on 20 homes before freeze-up.
Understanding the importance of air sealing, which I brought up before, if we have $50 to a house and we take 1 can of foam and we go up and we air seal the ceiling, we're going to save them some money, and it's that basic.
So one of the factors that drives our assessment is what we call stack effect inside a house. Every house has this, the taller the more dramatic the effect is. But simply put, cold air infiltrates at the bottom, you pay to warm it up, it exfiltrates through any hole, leak it can out the top of it, right? One of the houses I worked on early on, I'll never forget, the client made the comment to me on the first day when is how warm his floor felt, and we hadn't even touched his floor at that point. But it speaks to what the stack effect is, that we've stopped the exfiltration of his warm air leaving the ceiling, and in doing that we've lowered the neutral pressure plane to, and so what was 76 degrees up here now is now 76 down to, closer to his feet.
Most ceilings are very porous. There's air going through, so in the winter what happens is the air goes through the ceiling and condensates and creates ice dams up in the attic. And many houses you go into, when you're surveying, you say, does your roof leak? And they'll say yes. So when does it leak? In the spring. Well, it's raining right now. Is it leaking? No. So what's happening is that stuff leaks, and then it gets your insulation wet. And this happens yearly, over and over and over. The insulation deteriorates, you get no R value out of it, your ceiling starts rotting, your whole house rots, And we've seen roof decking, sheeting that's, shot, needs to be replaced. So I think that, it's not a trick necessarily, but the value we get out of a couple cans of spray foam and a nimble guy to go up there and search for those holes, and we guide it with our blower door, so we test in, test out. We'll test a couple times during our air sealing to make sure we're hitting all the big, the big values. So on a house that's really well, put together, we're looking to reduce, our airflow basically. And that's about all we can do is, we can bring it down as much as we can when, they already have everything. We can still do something.
After the crew has insulated the house and tightened up all the air leaks, it's time to address the next important element of weatherization, and that is ventilation.
Working on one part of the house completely changes the dynamics of the entire house, and it's important to keep that in mind when performing weatherization. Once we air seal a home, moisture can become a problem. One thing we want to do when we do ventilate a house is to ensure the fact that we have good indoor air quality along with our added comfort and reduce utility costs.
To the client who doesn't understand the dynamics of a tightly sealed home, ventilation can be a hard sell.
To a lot of our clients, it doesn't make sense that we've just tightened up their house, saved them all this money, and we're going to put a ventilation fan in to blow it out of their house. You know, we have to address ventilation in these homes, because if we don't, you know, given the tightness of the home, occupancy level of the home, which we often see overcrowding in a lot of these homes, we will, you know, definitely affect indoor air quality if we don't.
Ten quarters, 16.58.
When I was in Sellewick, I had a gentleman working for me, and he really educated himself on what we were doing. So he actually itemized all his fuel bills. He charted all his electrical for the complete year. We came back in the spring, and he showed me on paper that he'd saved 45% on his energy consumption for 1 year. And at $10 a gallon at that time in Sellewick, that's a huge, huge savings.
Like Brad Smith, Albert Romer knows the difference a weatherized home can make in terms of comfort and cost to local residents.
They tend to tell me their houses is more warmer, a little tighter, and they see their fuel bill drop a little, and that's pretty much what I try and go for, because fuel is so expensive out here nowadays.
Though the improvements to each home in St. Mary's include work on windows, doors, ceilings, and walls, Smith and his crew focus on insulating the floors on as many units as they can before the snow flies.
When we're ramped up and doing more like out here where we're doing 20-some houses in one village, you have to set it up like production line, and that's what's going on right now here. They did all the siding, windows, doors at one point, paint. Now they're going to transitioning into floors and attics. And Rural Cap typically was going out and hitting, 4 or 5 guys on one house, getting it done, moving on. And then when we got the big funding in mid-2000s, suddenly we had villages that I had one of 54 houses in Stebbins, expecting to get them done in one season. And you come in with a varied workforce. You don't know what your skill levels are, or what if they've worked in construction or anything like that. And you pretty much hire everybody in town.
I got into weatherization when they came to Kipnuk in 2008, 2009 to weatherize the community. And I had applied for a job and got a laborer position for the company and been working for them ever since. When I was about 7 years old in Kipnuk, when Rural Cap first weatherized Kipnuk in the mid-90s, I remember seeing crews go around the villages weatherizing, changing windows and doors. And I thought that was pretty cool because that was a big job when they came and did that in the summertime. My dad and uncles were doing siding crew and insulating houses, pretty much what I'm doing now today.
The crews will work on homes here through October if warm temperatures hold out. Already the loss of daylight is a factor and startup times are later each day. At some point, it's time to call it a season.
So our compressors don't run, four-wheelers don't run, crew doesn't run. So after a point, it's useless.
Though the chop saws, air nailers, and other equipment will fall silent, there's more to a successful weatherization program than knowing how to increase the R factors in a house. While the harsh winds howl throughout winter, project leaders with WorldCap dedicate their days to logistics.
The work is far from over. The logistics of it begin. We start to order materials and plan how these materials are going to get to each individual community. Once I return from the assessment and get everything, the scope prioritized through ACWARM, the next step would be to order the materials. And after that, we start to work on the logistics of how to get those materials to the individual communities, in a timeline that we can work with. We try to have this process wrapped up by April at the latest. That way I can get materials onto a barge in May, and hopefully that barge will hit wherever it's supposed to be about June, and we also try to have our employees land about that same time so we can maximize our short building season.
In 2022, the supplies arrived at St. Mary's in time, but a tundra fire threatened to destroy the entire village. What began with a lightning strike on the dry tundra 15 miles east of the village quickly became cause for panic when shifting winds drove the ensuing fire toward town. Equipment operators scrambled with earth movers to cut a fire break, and regional airlines diverted planes to St. Mary's to begin evacuating residents. Hours later, hotshot fire crews landed and began fighting the blaze. The next day, the wind shifted, the heavy smoke cleared, and the fire traveled away from the village. After St. Mary's returned to normal, it was time to organize the crew. If weatherization improvements were ever completed in every last home in rural Alaska, chances are good that Brad Smith and Albert Romer would find niches doing similar work.
I'd probably still be doing some kind of remote construction.
I spent years framing houses in the private sector. And while it was a good job, a good career, it's definitely not as rewarding as what I do now.
The other rewards I get out of this is meeting new people around Alaska and getting to know them and their values, what they value and what they do.
Not too many people, I think, have jobs where you're directly changing somebody's life by making it better for them.